All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bonk.
Target penetrated.
Bonk.
Enemy severely
Bonk. 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 There's the refund. Bonk. Wow, dude. Sure. Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the missile concept Wargaming is adding in the next update. This will be its own special mode, and I need to stress that we are on the public test server right now. This is still very early days. Some of the bugs and glitches certainly could be ironed out. But since we have access, and anybody has access to the public test server, well, I had to check it out a little bit early. I have many criticisms of this event and of missiles in general. However, I do need to stress that this is just a test concept here. We should not be looking at the final values of these missiles in their reload, their damage output, their range, their speed, anything like that. I really want to focus in on the concept of adding missiles to the game and how I think that's not going to go very well for World of Warships. I did have some fun in this game mode, I will say, especially when I got to that insane destroyer with the main guns. Even in a missile test, when that should be the primary ammo type, the main thing that we're testing out, everything should be geared towards the missiles being fun. The most fun part was the main guns, the surface ship gun combat. It seems to me that is what World of Warships was designed around, and maybe some of this extra stuff they're trying to add to the game maybe shouldn't be. So before we go any further, let's talk these missiles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh my goodness. It is kind of crazy how this missile system works. Essentially, think of it like Dutch airstrikes, except at the very end, the box that you put on the water is now a circle, and well, your armament homes in on the target within that circle. Instead of saturating a certain area of the map, the water, with a ton of bombs, but not very accurate bombs necessarily, it's all about one missile coming in and homing in on that target within that sector. It is very, very powerful. It is something that I don't think would fit the game particularly well. I already find that we have a lot to deal with as far as top-down attacks from carriers, submarines, and their homing torpedoes, airstrikes from the Dutch cruisers, the whole Dutch lines. It is not very fun to deal with those things, and adding missiles I don't think would be a good idea at all. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, PQ, this is a special game mode. This is PvE only. They've said as much. Why are you talking as if this will be added to random battles, the standard game mode? Well, I have to bring your attention back to 2018, back in the Halloween event where they added submarines as an option to play in its own special game mode that was only PvE and only in that special Halloween mode. And then it was removed from the game for a long period of time. Now fast forward a few years, and what do we have in random battles? Something that I would argue is a massive mistake and only serves to lessen the gameplay experience of the surface ship combat that World of Warships is completely designed around. Make no mistake, the surface ship combat is the main mode of this video game. The carriers, the submarines, all of that is secondary in my opinion. And I don't think that's a particularly hot take. In fact, for Wargaming, have you seen the marketing material they make for this video game? A lot of it's surface ship combat, especially close-range brawling surface ship content, to try and entice people to play. And then they log in, and suddenly there's carriers, there's subs, and maybe in a few years there's also missiles. And for someone like me, it's quite disappointing to see more additions that will only serve to make the game more passive. You cannot push into this. Homing airstrikes, you cannot push into this. This is something that you're going to have to hide behind islands from. That was really the only counter here. While playing this, we did have a consumable. It's on my Y key right now. And that massively reduces the damage that you take from these missile attacks. But when that's not up, you take immense damage. And I tried my best to actually not use that consumable when I was aware of certain angles that missiles would come from. And I would try and do my best to avoid it, right? Just dodge. And I found myself unable to do so consistently or find a way to do it that required skill. It felt like luck that the missile just happened to sail over my ship and land in the water or land too short rather than anything I did to dodge that incoming missile. And with that in mind, it really seems like there is very little counterplay here, as well as very little gameplay on the side of those using these missiles. It's fire and forget. You just click on a section of the water and then suddenly you're rewarded with massive damage if there's an enemy ship in that circle. It seems to me like it's lacking a ton of depth that we find in surface ship gun combat in particular. Angles matter, armor plates matter, distance matters, your position, your dodging, all of that matters, your maneuverability, how much healing you have, it all matters. Whereas with these missiles, none of that matters. All that matters is if you have this special consumable active, it negates all of that damage. And if you don't have it, suddenly you take the full damage from that missile. It's not very engaging. It's a very binary system, which I don't think works particularly well in a PvP game. We already have enough systems, in my opinion, that function as binary, where you just lose if you're on the wrong side of that engagement. Carriers are an example of this, where you can shoot down planes, but those planes will just keep coming. There isn't any sort of counterplay where you can actually attack that ship that that player is controlling. It's going to be at the back of the map, consistently launching planes at you. Submarines in a solo versus a submarine, there is really not much you can do. You're just selecting a box on the map against a splash that is randomly generated within a couple kilometers of the submarine pinging you. There are so many things in surface v surface ship combat even that result in very binary outcomes. And it's even worse when it comes to these extra additions like carriers and subs. I do think missiles will only serve to make the game worse because they fit into this category. So let's say I'm right about this, and we already have a very passive meta where people complain about blowouts where their team just sits in spawn and they lose automatically. They already complain about a lack of counterplay. What are you going to do if all of these missiles suddenly are aimed at you and you don't have this consumable up because you'd already just used it? What will we do against that? I don't have any answers for you, but I do wonder if Wargaming will even listen to this feedback and this criticism at all. They have a history of listening to certain feedback and not others. They seem to take into account my feedback on the small things, on minor tweaks when it comes to these mechanics in their game, ships in their game, but on the large things where they're thinking of adding these giant game-changing classes and game mechanics, they seem to just steamroll through without really taking into consideration what the vast majority of the feedback looks like. They seem to latch onto a few who seem to be interested without really taking into account the vast majority of their player base. Perhaps I'm wrong on that, but it seems to be the case when it comes to the carrier and especially the carrier rework, submarines being added. I even saw this a little bit in World of Warships Legends when they added carriers to that game as well. It seems like when they get an idea of what they want to add to the game to progress it along on, I don't know whose version of naval combat, but it seems like someone who doesn't really play the game much. Perhaps this isn't fair, but it feels like someone high up who doesn't play the game much has an idea of what naval combat looks like and thinks their arcade naval combat game should have these things. They should have submarines and carriers and missiles, not really realizing or considering the impact that would have on the moment-to-moment gameplay. This is really the only way I've been able to rationalize the inclusion of submarines and especially carriers and their ongoing never-ending reworks to that class without just simply removing them. It seems like there is some directive that these must exist in some state, and it's up to the developers, junior developers, to balance it out within certain frameworks that they've been given, and that is an almost impossible task, it seems like. It's been a few years, we've had plenty of opportunities for these reworks, we're partway through another one, and it seems like we still can't get there. We already have matches where we get bombed a ton by planes incoming in this PvE mode as well. It's not really fun. There is not really any counterplay here. It's just dodge. But suddenly, on top of that, we're going to add in these tiny little boxes of missiles that come after our ship that can do massive damage at any angle, and I can't maneuver around them. And I'm only left with an on-off consumable as my counterplay. This seems very, very poorly made. It seems like someone decided that we need to try and get missiles into our naval combat game at all costs. It doesn't matter how it actually interacts with the current gameplay we have that works so well. And I'm really disappointed to see that. I'm trying really hard to have measured criticism here. I'm trying my absolute best to not just get mad and start yelling and freaking out about wargaming and the developers behind this, because that does not work. That is not something that will actually help us not have this potentially in the game. It did not work with submarines, they steamrolled through with that. It did not work with carrier reworks, they have steamrolled through with that. I'm trying my best to give measured criticism here, and maybe that will work. However, I don't have a lot of hope here, because this game mode to me feels even more a specifically designed. I mean, look at just the mess of bombs and planes and rockets, and it's very, very frustrating to deal with that kind of thing when you really play this game exclusively for that amazing surface ship combat that they designed all the way back in 2015 that I really, really enjoyed so much. 10 years later, I still absolutely love the surface ship combat. It seems to me this will simply get in the way. But as I was saying, I really don't have a lot of hope of this staying out of random battles. I see the history of wargaming steamrolling through with carriers and subs and these game mechanics that a lot of people have had outcries about not wanting and being banned for the game and still going through with it. The other okay, ignore the glitches. There's plenty of glitches. It's PTS. There's lag here. This was not my internet, in case you're wondering. This is just the game right now on PTS. I wonder if there's just an insane number of missiles going on over there that's overloading the system. A little bit of concerns there, but it's PTS. This is early access, essentially. Don't think of this as the finalized version of this event. And we really need to hope that this is not the finalized version of this event. Because I gotta wonder, where's the art assets? This is my other concern about them steamrolling this through into random battles, into the normal game. Because there's not much art assets here to make me think that this is a limited time, potentially Halloween event or Star Trek event, something like that they've done in the past. There are no skins on any of the ships that you can play or the bots play. There also aren't really any changes to the UI or any of the atmosphere outside of a large crack in the sky. They seem to mention a sci-fi element to this event in the dev blog, and yet I don't see it. Outside of that large crack in the sky up there, I guess that's it. It seems like a little bit rushed together to test this to see if missiles would fit into the normal game, more so than we would see a event for Star Trek or Halloween or spaceship battles. Remember old spaceship battles? Remember when they had like the 300-knot torps and DD knife fights on not even an ocean in space, but literally up in space, Space Battleship Yamato, all of that from back in the day. We used to get events like that, and sometimes those were just fun events, and other times they were legitimately testing concepts in them. And this feels to me quite half-baked on the missile concept, but also feels quite half-baked on the art assets and the time put into this to actually give us a PvE event that is interesting to play on its own. And because of that, I do legitimately think that this is only here to be a missile test. It is not here to be a special PvE mode that is only here for a limited time to just have fun and mess around with. I do think this is just an excuse to test out these missiles to see if they go well into random battles. But now that I've mentioned it, let's talk a little bit about these ships and this mode in particular. There are some changes versus just standard random battles. Obviously, the range is immense here. Another reason why I think this is only going to serve to make the game more passive. If missiles have such a long range and a short arming distance range, or rather, you can't launch missiles terribly close to your ship, it's only going to serve to be a better armament for those who sit further back. They also changed up guns massively here. Turret Traverse is massively buffed alongside these guns being rail guns essentially with no dispersion. They are a mixture of SAP and AP and HE. They do a ton of damage. They go through almost any angle, as well as the ability to light fires. So again, that's why I didn't really want to focus on the damage output of certain missiles and their range in absolute terms, anything like that, because this is tweaked enough to be its own special mode in terms of its gameplay. Not in terms of its art assets or any of that, but in terms of the gameplay tweaks, it is seemingly designed to be its own special fun PvE mode. If you're wondering on which of the 6 ships you should play, well, this destroyer, the cruiser I was initially playing, as well as the battleship that you unlock at the start. I think it's an A-gear, but slightly tweaked. Those are the ones that have combat instructions. You want combat instructions here because there is no way to recharge your missiles once you've used them. I found this very strange because if you look in the top left, we actually have a subtask, a secondary task, for winning with your team using limited respawns. But if the whole idea of this game mode is to test out missiles, and for half of the ships there is no way to reload those missiles outside of dying and respawning, you're just going to have people inting in as soon as they've used their missiles and then respawning just to gain access to those missiles again, because that's the whole concept of this playtest. That seems very counterintuitive to me. That seems to kind of go against what you would want to see out of playing at these longer ranges and playing with missiles. But I don't know. That just was something I found weird. The other thing I found weird was, well, the guns are just... Perhaps it's not weird. The guns are just way more fun. This destroyer was by far the most fun. I found the cruiser with the combat instructions also quite fun that we just were taking a look at, because you got a reload of those airstrikes, or sorry, those missiles. Got to keep that straight in my head. They function basically the same. We had a reload of them anytime we got a kill. This one, on 100 hits, we get a reload of these missiles, as well as consumable cooldown and torpedo reload too. But I just found the guns more fun. The guns combat is where World of Warships excels. Torps too, regular torps, not homing torps, but just regular torpedoes, as well as gun combat. Surface ship to surface ship combat is where this game absolutely shines. And I gotta say, this reminds me a little bit of the air-to-air missiles addition to War Thunder back in the day. I used to play War Thunder quite a lot. I absolutely loved early jet combat. I had so much fun with that. Even the later jet combat, at least back when I played, which was the F2 Sabre versus MiG-15 BIS, eventually CL-13A, those kind of matches, and alongside the Hokkaido games where it was Sea Meteors versus F2Hs. I loved those games. It was really, really fun. And then they added air-to-air missiles, and I just didn't enjoy that. And this is kind of reminding me of that. Maybe it's something some people will enjoy, but it's really, really going to push me away from the game if this comes into random battles. Again, I am basing this all on the assumption that it is a playtest for this to come to the regular game mode. You can disagree with me on that, but I don't see any evidence as to why this would be its own mode and not a test to come back to random battles, especially the lack of art assets. To me, especially what they've been doing recently with some of the ports that they've been changing and some of the events that they have been running, it seems like they're putting more effort into the game again, and yet with this mode they did not go through with a stylized event for Halloween or Star Trek or anything like that. I was a little bit disappointed. Oh, look at that. We actually dodged 2 missiles. Look at that. I didn't even need my immunity that I did use at that point. Although now that we've used it, we're pretty vulnerable again. These missiles have the ability to home in on us while we're in our smoke as well, so something to keep in mind there. They also have the ability to home in on targets that have never been spotted. I did test this out on World of Warships Legends. They ran a missile test there as well. and they actually had it in the Rust and Rumble event skin. So it had a lot more art assets dedicated to it, and it felt more complete as its own standalone game mode. This criticism could be invalidated as soon as it goes to the live server, and potentially there they do add all of the art assets back. But why wouldn't the art assets be included in PTS? We're less than a month away from this coming to the full game mode. But in that Legends test, I noticed that missiles could lock on to ships that are not detected by your ship at all. And I was testing that out by blind firing these missiles at an enemy destroyer. And here in the PC version, we're also going to be able to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to launch these missiles towards this battleship, and I don't really understand what the missiles want to lock onto. Is it the first thing they see when they go into their homing mode? I don't know what it comes down to, but we're going to get hits on the battleship, but then we're going to get hits on something that isn't the battleship. And then a destroyer spawns in with 9k HP only. I wonder where those homing missiles went. Can you see how that would be rather frustrating for anybody trying to play in stealth? Anybody that thinks they can go dark suddenly have a homing airstrike equivalent after them? I don't think that is really going to be very good for the game at all. It's only going to serve to make people play even further back. You're going to have to play so far back to try and avoid this kind of damage. And it's only going to serve to add damage to those who like to play at the back of the map, especially with this minimum arming threshold. It just seems so backwards to the game that I want World of Warships to be. And perhaps that's my own fault for having certain expectations and having too much of focus on surface ship combat at mid and closer ranges. But to me, it feels rather disappointing that the vast majority of these new tests and concepts don't do anything to address the lack of counterplay, the one-sided engagements. In fact, all these new concepts that we keep getting for subs and carriers, missiles, airstrikes, all of this seems to be very one-sided. We're seeing this even on certain surface ships as well. Think about something like Valparaiso. If that gets within secondary range of you, you do not finish it off. You don't kill it until all of those secondaries hit you and give you instant recharges to a super heal and a damage control. There really isn't a lot of counterplay on that ship, unless you find it flat broadside at those closer ranges or get off a really nice torpedo salvo on it. But the lack of counterplay, it feels to me like some of these surface ships are not very fun to fight against, let alone the stuff that attacks you from the air or from under the water. It's really concerning to me that the creativity that Wargaming is bringing to the game is less and less PvP counterplay focused, more on the person controlling the ship gets to enjoy having their automated damage, guaranteed damage into someone else, and the person taking that damage really can't do a whole lot against it. And I'm having an absolute blast here in this mode playing this ship. This was the most fun I had in the game mode. Not because of the missiles, no, but because the main guns were so hilarious on this thing. And the ability to YOLO in with them and just get a billion citadels. It was really fun. But at a certain point, you gotta wonder, even in a missile test, if the main guns are way more enjoyable than the missiles are, why are we focused on adding missiles to the game? Maybe we could just add some more interesting gun concepts, and maybe we could focus on map design to deal with and help with the problem of passive sniping games and people wanting to use kiting as an advantage all the time and never really deciding to push in. Again, I could be entirely wrong here. In fact, I really hope I am wrong and that this is legitimately just a PvE special event that will never come to random battles. I really want to be incorrect on my assumption that this is eventually coming to the PvP portion of the game. I just don't think that's anywhere realistic. Why would they spend all the time in developing this system, which to me does seem like just airstrikes with a homing element added at the end? Maybe not the most complicated concept, but why would they put the dev time into it if they weren't planning on adding it to the main PvP game mode, right? That doesn't make too much sense when they could have been developing something that is potentially for the main game mode. This also opens up a whole host of issues when it comes to balance for mid-tiers. If this is added as a tier 12 and something that never sees tier 10, maybe it only fights super ships and whatever tier this is, and that's it, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's an okay addition to the game then, because you only face this if you know what you're getting into. But what happens if they start adding mid-tier premiums where their whole gimmick is the missile thing? Something like Tiger 59 jumps out at me as a later design that is at a lower tier and has almost no gunpowder. But what if they added missiles to something like that? And suddenly you face tier 6s with homing missiles. It seems like pretty easily a slippery slope towards everyone has to deal with this at all tiers, and it's not just something that's added to later tiers, if they even decide to add it. But maybe that's okay. Maybe this is a test for another game. But considering how they just shut down 2 potential games that they've been developing for years at this point, and seemingly have come back to developing their standard live service games at this point, I doubt that they're planning on making a World of Warships 2.0 with Cold War era tech and leaving this game in its World War II and World War I eras. I highly doubt that they're going to split things up like that. So very, very concerned that this sort of missile system does make it to random battles. I've been rambling quite a lot. I honestly did not know how this video would go. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Maybe Wargaming will listen to us, maybe they won't. But I do want to hear what you guys have to say about this mode and what you think about it. I am very worried, as you can tell. I've done my best to not just get mad. I've done my best to really give measured responses to this, because my initial reaction was very, very negative. It was a mixture of sadness alongside just defeat, really, overall. I especially when I was initially playing these modes, I was really, really sad, because in my brain, it just does not in any world compute that this is just its own special mode and it never comes to random battles. I've seen this a couple times before, especially with submarines, but even the way these carrier reworks has gone, it's been very, very disappointing to me. And seeing this added is just another step towards game mechanics that I constantly will have to deal with to try and get to the fun of World of Warships that I love so much. I think of it like, to use like a bit like Shrek, right? Onions with layers. This game has layers at this point. You got to peel through so many layers to get to the fun stuff. Not that that's a great analogy, because it's not like the core of the onion is any different from the edges, really, but that's kind of how I feel. I got to wade through a bunch of uncounterable one-sided crap that I have to deal with just to get to the fun surface ship PvP combat that I love so much about this game. The more they add this kind of uncounterable one-sided gimmicks, the less time I'm going to actually have enjoying the game, and the more time I'm going to spend being really frustrated while playing this video game. And I just don't want to have that experience happen. So Wargaming, please, please do not add this to random battles. I'm very, very concerned. I'm very worried about this concept, and I hope that you listen to the community, but listening to the community can mean a lot of different things. I saw some Xbox announcement of they're listening to their community and adding features to Game Pass as their excuse to raise the price to like $30 a month or something like that, right? There's different versions of listening to your community, okay? And I would very much prefer that you don't do that version. I don't know, man. I don't understand why this is even necessary to the game. Like, at a certain point, don't we have to consider what the core product is, Wargaming? Like, what is the core value you're adding to the gaming landscape with World of Warships? Why do people stick with this game rather than going to any of the other live service games or just single player experiences? Why do people spend time with your game? And I don't think it's to deal with one-sided PvP mechanics where you're locked out of that battle. I think it's to have this really fun, diverse, every match has the potential to be different surface ship, gun, torp, naval combat. It's slow paced. It's very different from the vast majority of PvP games because it is so slow. But adding things like carriers that can traverse across the map in fraction of the time of any surface ship, alongside being able to run circles around those surface ships to line up the perfect drop anywhere they want to, missiles that home in on targets hundreds of kilometers away, depending on how modern they want to get with those missiles. Here in this example, it goes out to 28, 35 kilometer range missiles. that's not going to be very fun. In fact, one of the disappointing factors of this battle type for me was actually that a lot of the battles were played so far apart. Sure, the missiles travel fast, the torps travel fast, the gun's shell velocity is fast, but I would rather have closer ranged battles with slower velocity. I think it's more interesting, it's more fun when the ships are closer together, not further apart. Something I haven't really talked about yet is the defense of these missiles with your AA. They talk about AA having a chance to shoot down missiles. They talk about your missile having HP, a little bit similar to airstrikes, right? And so far, I haven't really noticed my ship shooting down any of those missiles. It really does seem like I need to have my immunity button up, or I need to get super lucky to not take a ton of damage to these missiles. And if it is going to be AA, the AA doesn't seem to be firing at all. Maybe that's a bug with PTS. Again, it's another reason I've been trying to be a little more measured here and understanding, because it is still PTS. This is not on our live server yet. But I don't really notice these flak clouds coming up and shooting at the missiles throughout my experience here. They're shooting at the planes, but not necessarily at those missiles. Here we're playing the other cruiser, and this one does not have combat instructions, so highly recommend you play the ones with combat instructions. The ability to reload those missiles is very interesting. Same with this destroyer. You don't have the ability to reload the missiles, so then you feel incentivized to just int your ship in, which is, you know, not very good for your team when your secondary task is to not respawn terribly often. But at this point, I've probably rambled long enough. I might be repeating myself, but I'm just so worried about the direction that this will bring to the game. And I am feeling a little defeated even before we get to this full mode being in the game and our feedback goes through to Wargaming, because I just don't see it that they actually listen to us when we say that we don't want this in the game. I don't see any world where this isn't just put into the full live random battle modes and we just suddenly will have to deal with it. I really, really hope I'm wrong there, but I'm very, very worried. Maybe Wargaming, you could let me know if the feedback actually matters at all. I don't know. It feels to me like a lot of the feedback gets through to the community managers, and then they pass it along to whoever they pass it along to, and somehow it just evaporates from there and it doesn't go anywhere. Maybe that's too cynical. I don't know. I've been rambling long enough about this that it's feeling pretty bad. And I don't want to make videos that are just purely negative about World of Warships, of course. But when things like this come up, I guess I feel like I have to try and say my piece and get my perspective out there. And hopefully a similar perspective that my community shares. Maybe that matters to Wargaming as well. I don't know. But I'm worried about the future of this game, and I really, really hope Wargaming is not taking this game in the direction of these homing missiles, because it is going to be a very, very frustrating future if that is the case. Well, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Again, I would love to hear what you think about this mode, potential missiles in the future. Maybe I'm wrong, but let me know in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bonk.